The entire world has been talking about BlackRock's recent Bitcoin ETF filing, but is this any different to the other 15 or so ETFs that have been launched in the past 2 years?
The price of Bitcoin has surged today as financial institutions from BlackRock to WisdomTree continue to give their Bitcoin blessings.
Indeed, BlackRock, the world's biggest asset manager, is reportedly close to filing an application for a Bitcoin ETF.
In today's video, I'm going to make the case for why it is and why it's going to unlock an absolute flood of freshly printed fiat money into the Bitcoin space. And in a video yesterday, I showed you guys the 5 pieces of evidence that prove that this flood of money could potentially prove to be an attack on Bitcoin. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on into today's video. But I want to show you guys the 5 reasons for why this BlackRock ETF is going to be hugely bullish for Bitcoin. And it's going to create something we've never seen before. And it all has to do with this timeline. There is no way somebody could look at that timeline and think that BlackRock's ETF could be bearish for Bitcoin. In the following 6 days after this BlackRock announcement, we've seen $10 trillion banks and money managers try to flood into the Bitcoin space. Those include household names such as Fidelity, Charles Schwab, Invesco, WisdomTree, iShares, and even the largest bank in Germany, Deutsche Bank, just to name a few. Now, we're going to come back to this bullish timeline a little bit later on into today's video, and I'm going to show you some very key events that I've deliberately left off the timeline that suggest that this could be an attack on Bitcoin, but I want to show you how much money these $10 trillion banks are actually managing. So we can see here from this little video that this is looking at the 20 largest money managers in the world, and we can see that they actually control $57 trillion of capital. That is enormous. And 12 of those banks and money managers in the top 20 are either filing for a Bitcoin ETF or are bullish on Bitcoin. So how much of that 57 trillion could we expect to see flow into the Bitcoin space? How bullish would it be for Bitcoin to see just 5% of that capital flow into Bitcoin? Quick maths off the top of my head, I believe 5% of 57 trillion would be somewhere around $2.8-ish trillion flowing into Bitcoin, which today only has a market cap of $600 billion, okay? So I'm sure most of you guys are probably thinking, yeah, nice hypothetical, Luke, 5%, yeah, that's an outrageous speculation. Well, I have some data to back up that claim. There was a recent survey that was recently undertaken by a Japanese investment bank, and they actually surveyed 303 money managers from all around the world. They were based in Europe, Hong Kong, China, the US, the Middle East, Singapore, South Africa, Brazil, every single continent of the world, and 94% of those money managers actually thought that digital assets, quote unquote, were actually vital to invest in the digital age. And just when you thought that was bullish, those 303 money managers that were surveyed actually control over $5 trillion of capital. Okay, that is enormous. Imagine 5% of 5 trillion trying to flow into Bitcoin. That's what they're openly saying. They are openly saying that digital assets are vital to our investment portfolios. And the survey also showed that Bitcoin was the main quote unquote digital asset that these money managers were actually interested in. So what kind of demand is that going to create for Bitcoin? Just looking at that very small sample size, we have $5 trillion of money managers. They reckon 5% of that money should be stuck into Bitcoin. That's around $250 billion of demand coming into Bitcoin. And most of you guys who are regular watchers here on the channel know that for every 1 Bitcoin that tries to flow into Bitcoin, it does not push the Bitcoin market cap up by $1, it actually pushes the Bitcoin market cap up by 2.6x. That is the Bitcoin multiplier effect, as we call it here on this channel. But we're going to talk about that in another video, and we also talk about that briefly in the newsletter that we wrote on this topic. That one is linked down below and includes a few charts and graphs that we don't actually get into today's YouTube video. Again, there's only so many things we can cram into these short and sharp little YouTube videos for you guys. So let's move on. What kind of money can we expect to see flow into Bitcoin? Are we just speculating? Is this BlackRock ETF different? Okay. If this BlackRock ETF is successful, this would actually be the first Bitcoin spot ETF in the United States. Do we have any precedents in the world or in the Bitcoin space that gives us a kind of idea of what kind of performance we can expect? We've seen many, paper-backed ETFs launched before. As we're going to talk about and have briefly talked about, we had a spot ETF in Canada that saw enormous demand. But how about the United States? Well, we have an example from 2004 that I think is actually going to be very interesting to look at. So I'm really not interested about price predictions here on the channel, but I want to show you what happened to the price of gold the last time a major US-based gold ETF got approved. That was the GLD ETF, and that puppy got approved in 2004. And you can see what happened to the price of gold in the following 4 years. The price rallied by 370%, okay? So ETFs are a big deal, and in the Bitcoin and quote-unquote crypto space, they are also an enormous deal. Think about it. The 2021 paper US futures ETF called BitGo that got launched right at the Pico top in 2021 at around $65,000. And let's also remember back to a major Bitcoin peak in 2017. This is when I just came into the Bitcoin space. I was a little bit crypto curious. And when I was looking to learn stuff on Bitcoin, this is what I was bombarded with. Everybody was talking about Bakkt, okay?
It's Bakkt, and that's B-A-K-K-T, a digital asset marketplace founded by the Intercontinental Exchange, and they own the NYSE, the New York Stock Exchange.
And that was supposedly going to launch an enormous wave of institutional capital into Bitcoin, but that ETF never actually got off the ground. So what I'm trying to say is ETFs mark major pivots in the market. If we have a look at our chart again that I showed you guys in the beginning of the video, I've actually drawn up and listed every single ETF filing on the price chart of Bitcoin. And you can see all of it happens in a bull market. Yes, sometimes you get rumors of an ETF or you get an ETF launch at the very top, but that's just a sign of euphoria and everybody wanting to get exposure to Bitcoin. And what's really special about this potential ETF filed by BlackRock is it would actually be a spot Bitcoin ETF. Kind of. We're going to actually talk about the differences between trusts and ETFs shortly, but you can see here we have 2 ETFs already in the US. We have around 4 in Canada, a couple in Brazil, 2 in Switzerland, 2 in Germany, 2 in Australia, but we don't have a spot ETF in the United States yet. And of course, the United States is the financial capital of the world. It's the global reserve currency. 70% of global trade is done in US dollars. To have a Bitcoin spot ETF in the US would be absolutely enormous. And it would be very different to the other 15 or so smaller ETFs that have been launched around the world in previous years. And it's worth mentioning, I believe this Bitcoin ETF filing is pretty much a shoo-in, okay? We can have a look at BlackRock's record here. They have filed for an ETF on 576 occasions in history, and they've only been denied once. Okay? So you can see here that I actually ran the numbers over on the CoinBeast Twitter account. Shout out, you should actually make sure you're following us over on Twitter. I'm posting and shit posting all day, every day from that account, trying to keep you up to date with what is going on. And I actually showed that, hey, there's a 99.83% chance that this BlackRock ETF filing is going to be a shoo-in and it's going to be approved by the SEC. And that is because they are very connected. And as we're going to see in a future video, they are enormously connected to all sorts of different institutions around the world. But we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about how big this will be and how different it is going to be from previous ETFs. So some people have actually compared this to the Grayscale Trust, and this ETF filing from BlackRock is very different. It is much more like a traditional ETF. ETFs manage around 95% of all the capital in that market. Okay, trusts only make up a very small percentage of the actual investable markets. Okay, so this ETF, whatever paper Bitcoin that BlackRock is going to give you, it's going to actually mimic the price of Bitcoin relatively well, because BlackRock will be able to actually buy Bitcoin and sell Bitcoin as funds flow into and out of their ETF/trust arrangement that they are going to have. That's a little bit different to what's going on at Grayscale, because they kind of have a fixed or certain amount of shares that they have. And that is why those shares, those Grayscale shares, are so volatile, okay? I don't want to get too granular on this one. I want to actually move on and have a look at something really interesting. I actually believe this BlackRock ETF is going to smash all of the records associated with ETF filings, okay? Let's just think back to the Canadian spot ETF that happened in 2021. That broke the $1 billion record in around 2 days, okay? Took only 2 days for that ETF to go from $0 to $1 billion. That's enormous. And that actually took the record off the GLD ETF, okay? That was the one we were talking about earlier, the Pet Rock gold-enabled ETF. So I actually think this BlackRock ETF is going to smash all of those records. And if we did see some sort of outrageous inflows like that in a day or two, What is that going to do to the price of Bitcoin? That's the big question that I want to know, because Bank of America actually ran a really interesting study back in 2021. And when Elon Musk bought that first $1.5 billion of Bitcoin, they actually found that for every $1 that was flowing into Bitcoin, it actually pushed the Bitcoin market cap up by over 105x. And that all has to do with the limited amount of supply there is actually circulating on exchanges. Like we mentioned earlier, there's only 2.1 million Bitcoins sitting on exchanges for sale today. So what is going to happen if $1 billion of capital tries to flow into this BlackRock ETF and they have to go out there and buy $1 billion of Bitcoin? I'll let you guys think about that and let me know in the comments down below where you think that's going to send the price of Bitcoin to. Now, I always tell you guys, watch what the smart money is doing, not what they're saying, okay? And in a tweet thread that I put out last week, the very day before BlackRock actually filed for this ETF, I was making the case that, hey, why is BlackRock one of the world's largest holders of micro strategy stock? I actually exposed in that little tweet thread that BlackRock had been buying millions and millions of dollars worth of micro strategy, which everybody should know is actually kind of like a Bitcoin proxy, okay? MicroStrategy holds like $4 billion worth of Bitcoin. And as we can see by this chart here, their stock price actually accurately reflects the price of Bitcoin. And until we do get a potential spot Bitcoin ETF, buying MicroStrategy is the easiest way for institutional investors to actually get exposure into Bitcoin. So I laid this out in a tweet thread. As you can see here, it went a little bit viral. And I was making the case, hey, look, BlackRock is actually holding and buying a shit ton of MicroStrategy stock. What is going on here? And why are all of these other banks around the world, not just in America, but also in Canada, buying MicroStrategy stock? So that's the bullish case for this BlackRock Bitcoin ETF. But what about the bearish case? Where could this potentially go wrong for Bitcoin and potentially even turn into a government coordinated crackdown and attack on Bitcoin? Well, this quote that was actually hidden inside the BlackRock ETF filing gave me all sorts of shivers and sent me down a rabbit hole looking for answers. And I was a little bit shocked at what I found. In this quote, BlackRock actually says that they're able to pick whatever fork of Bitcoin that they want to pick. For those of you who are around for 2017 or know about the hard fork that occurred with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, this is a very scary proposition, especially considering BlackRock is actually using the largest exchange, CoinBeast, to be their custodian. What is going to happen to the 1 million Bitcoins that's sitting on Coinbase if BlackRock tries to fork Bitcoin? Now, I thought that was really interesting to mention because for those of you who remember the 2017 Bitcoin Civil War, as it was called, Coinbase was actually on the side of the big blockers. So for anyone who might be new, we should briefly explain what a Bitcoin hard fork is. So in 2017, many of the largest exchanges and the Bitcoin miners in the space actually tried to change the rules of Bitcoin. So if you want to change the rules of Bitcoin, you propose a hard fork. And that is what we saw in 2017. We saw the big blockers try to increase the block size of Bitcoin. Very simply, all that would have done is jammed more and more transactions into those blocks, which of course would have made the exchanges and the miners far more profitable. And some people might be thinking, that's a good thing. More Bitcoin transactions. What's so harmful about increasing the Bitcoin block size? Well, funny you should ask. If you increase the size of the Bitcoin blockchain too big, all of a sudden it becomes nearly impossible to get yourself one of these things. This here is a Bitcoin node, and it has an entire copy of the 14-year history of Bitcoin's life. Okay, it has every single transaction, it records every single transaction, and it checks that the rules are being followed by everybody on the network. By having one of these nodes yourself in your home, you are essentially choosing what kind of rules in the monetary system that you are choosing to abide by. You are fully self-sovereign. But the only reason I'm actually able to run one of these, a Bitcoin node, is because the Bitcoin blockchain today is only around 500 gigabytes in size. Most laptops today have hard drives with around 1 terabyte of data storage. So that means on an everyday laptop, you can actually download a copy of the Bitcoin ledger and you can essentially participate in the network and choose which rules you want to follow. And in 2017, what happened was you saw an enormous surge in the amount of Bitcoin Bitcoin nodes connecting to the network, because people were voting with their own economic value and saying, I value the ability to actually run a Bitcoin node, and I want small blocks. Small blocks keep Bitcoin decentralized because people from all around the world can actually continue choosing what rules they want to follow. Now, how does this relate to BlackRock, you might be thinking, and how do we fight back against any potential attack BlackRock could be pushing? So there's been a number of tweets on Bitcoin Twitter all week saying that this BlackRock Bitcoin ETF could potentially be an attack on Bitcoin. So what's this going to look like? Let's theorize how we could potentially defend against any BlackRock attack on Bitcoin, okay? It is this wording in their Bitcoin ETF filing that really is causing many people to raise their eyebrows. Many people have said that BlackRock is probably going to see a huge inflow of capital into their Bitcoin ETF. Let's remember, all of the exchanges in the US are being attacked, okay? The SEC is suing Binance, they're suing Coinbase, many of the other exchanges in the space are getting attacked. We have Operation Choke Point 2.0 going on in America in early 2023. So there are essentially no options for people to buy Bitcoin in the US. The only option people would have is the safe and trustworthy BlackRock ETF. So that's the facts. There's no speculation in that, but let's pop the tinfoil hat on for just a few minutes here and really game this out. What is going to happen when all that money flows into BlackRock? All of a sudden, they control a little bit more of the Bitcoin network. So today, there's around 2 million Bitcoins sitting on exchanges for sale, but something that's really bullish and actually positive for Bitcoin is the fact that 14 million of the Bitcoins have not moved in the past 1 year, okay? So that is over 70% of the entire Bitcoin network, all the 21 million. And it's also really important to point out that just hypothetically, if BlackRock got their hands on 1 or 2 million Bitcoins, doesn't mean they can control or change the network, okay? Bitcoin is not proof of stake. It doesn't matter how much money you have, you cannot change the rules of Bitcoin. 2017 saw that example, but is it really so far-fetched to imagine that in, say, 12 to 24 months, there's a huge crisis that hits the world? Imagine like a cyber attack. I mean, the World Economic Forum's talking a lot about cyber attacks recently, and imagine a cyber attack happens and all of a sudden our government officials come out and say, look, we need to KYC the internet. We also need to make sure that nobody is using anonymous Bitcoin. That's dangerous. And these cyber terrorists use anonymous Bitcoin to bring down the power grids. Would that really be so far-fetched? I mean, the World Economic Forum is predicting the event of a cyber pandemic. That's Klaus Schwab's words, not mine.
But still, pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack. To use the COVID-19 crisis as a timely opportunity to reflect on the lessons the cybersecurity community can draw and improve our preparedness for a potential cyber pandemic.
And this kind of announcement would probably also come in combination with all sorts of bans on Bitcoin. We're already seeing the language try to be normalized around the world. The IMF, the World Economic Forum, the FATF, they're all calling Bitcoin wallets actually self-hosted wallets. They're trying to create this really bizarre terminology. In Europe, they're even banning the self-custody of Bitcoin. So I don't think a potential scenario like that in a few years is too far-fetched, and I believe it's something to watch, okay? How do we defend against this kind of attack? Well, the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it's very easy to take custody of. So if you have Bitcoins sitting on an exchange, you definitely need to get them off. If you are in the market looking for a hardware wallet, I'd love to point you towards our newest YouTube show sponsor. That is the BitBox02 Bitcoin only hardware wallet. They're a great little device. You can literally get up and running with one of those puppies in under 5 minutes. And the most important thing about a BitBox is it's Bitcoin only. And now the importance of getting your hands on a Bitcoin only hardware wallet couldn't be any more prescient, especially considering what happened with the Ledger Recover announcement only recently, when the Ledger team kind of implied that there's a possibility that the Bitcoin private key could be extracted from the secure element on the ledger, okay? Again, I'd like to remind you guys, I'm not a technical expert. I'm certainly not a financial advisor. So again, if that is incorrect, let me know in the comments down below. I would love to learn more. But it was certainly the way that this ledger recover feature was announced that really caused lots of people in the Bitcoin space to raise their eyebrow at least. And something else about ledger that makes me really raise an eyebrow is the fact that their CEO was actually invited to speak at the World Economic Forum's annual Davos meeting. No, you heard that correctly. I recently posted a video about that, and as you can see, he was pretty happy with being invited to the World Economic Forum's annual meeting.
From the World Economic Forum. I would like to start this short video by saying thank you to the World Economic Forum and thank you to the French government for the invitation they kindly extended to Ledger. We feel very privileged to be here this year. I want to leave you with one big idea, is that crypto is at the heart of the debate at Davos. Crypto is here, crypto was at the WEF, crypto was around the WEF.
Very interesting words there by the Ledger CEO at the World Economic Forum's annual Davos meeting. Just maybe another reason why you should not be trusting a hardware wallet that is closed source, has altcoins, and you need to actually trust them that the code running on this thing is actually safe and trustworthy, okay? Just another reason why you should get a great Bitcoin only hardware wallet like the Bitbox O2 that is open source code and there's no shit coins inside that puppy. You guys can get 5% off if you use the link in the description of today's video. But let's get back to the World Economic Forum because I'm not done connecting dots today, okay? The World Economic Forum not only has connections to Ledger, but they also have connections to BlackRock and BlackRock's custodian, CoinBase. And that is not the only thing that's really making me pay attention to the World Economic Forum recently. They actually published a 35-page white paper on the need to regulate Bitcoin on May 25th. That's right, let's go back to our timeline because in the beginning of today's video, I showed you one version of events. I showed you a bullish timeline of 5 things that's happening that's going to make BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF a good thing for the space. But I've also actually uncovered 5 pieces of evidence that suggest that BlackRock's entrance into the Bitcoin space could potentially be a secret government takeover of Bitcoin. That's right. As you can see, we have the Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, FedNow, and the World Economic Forum all making moves in the Bitcoin space in the past 28 days. And let's not forget the SEC's recent attack on Binance and Coinbase. What I've uncovered is truly shocking. If you want to learn more about that, I ripped an entire 27-minute video just yesterday on BlackRock's $9 trillion Bitcoin takeover. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out that video right there. But if you're sick of the doom and the gloom and you want to learn a little bit more about the hottest citadel around the world, you can also check out the video I recently recorded on my 1-year Bitcoin challenge in El Salvador. You can find that video right there. And with all that said, I'll see you guys in the next video.